Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'm KT, and this is what happened. If you could imagine being offered the opportunity to map out the seat of your federal government, it would probably be one of your biggest achievements. But tonight, we're going to talk about a man that did get this offer, and he actually mapped out the federal seat known as Washington, D.C., and yet it was only one of many achievements that he would accomplish. So everyone, tune in, sit back, relax, and get ready, because tonight we're going to talk about Mr. Benjamin Banneker. Before I get started, I want to cite my references. One was actually Benjamin Banneker High School, and another was the White House Historical Association, whose website you'll see on the screen. That said, let's go into part one, entitled The Backstory. Benjamin Banneker was born free, and this was a big deal because he was born on November 9th, 1731. He was born on a 100-acre tobacco farm, and it was owned by his parents. Along the Patapsco River, Benjamin Banneker's father was a formerly enslaved man. However, his mother was a mixed-race woman. This all takes place in Baltimore County, Maryland, and it's important because it's going to let us take a journey back even further to his grandmother. Benjamin Banneker's grandmother had been a white woman named Mary Walsh. In 1683, she was working as a dairy maid in England. She would milk cows in the morning and she would milk them in the evening. We have to note that there were serious punishments for stealing milk. We have to note it, even though that's not what Mary did. One day she was milking a pretty stubborn cow, and the cow kicked and knocked the milk bucket over, spilling the milk on the ground. Her employer then accused her of stealing that milk. Because of this, she ended up in the courts. For some people, this could have been a death sentence. It's crazy, right? But Mary was actually educated and she knew how to read, so she came out better than most people in this court. However, there were still heavy consequences. She was sentenced to 7 years of indentured servitude in the new American colonies. And that is how she ended up in Maryland. While in Maryland, she worked her 7 years and finished her indentured servitude. And after that, she had a unique knowledge and was able to start her own farm. Now, she needed help with this farm, so she actually bought a slave, a male slave, and she promised him, "I will free you as soon as I get my farm started." And guess what? She kept that promise. They ended up falling in love and getting married. Thus, she had her daughter, who was mixed race, and her daughter was Benjamin Banneker's mother. So I think it speaks to a long line of people who really were outside of the boxes that were drawn for them to live in. Back to Benjamin Banneker's childhood. As a child, he did live a free life. However, as a black person in the 1730s or even 40s, this would have been still extremely hard. Keep in mind, there was a rising sentiment against free blacks, so they would have still experienced hostilities that can only be fully understood if you've lived in that race, in that time, in that environment. Because of this, the Banneker family had to tread very lightly in their own neighborhood. Nevertheless, Benjamin Banneker received an education, and that was uncommon during that time. And I want to be clear, that's not just because he was black, but keep in mind, he lived in a farming community. A lot of people in that community, even if they were white, still could not even read, long well as have a full education. Mary Walsh, his grandmother that had been a servant, was the same person that taught him to read and write. As he got a little older, he was able to continue his studies alongside both black and white classmates because the nearest school was a one-room school. And this continued until Mr. Banneker hit his early 20s. It was at this time that he carved a wooden clock. Was this the first clock ever made? Absolutely not, but it was different. And the biggest reason is that it kept perfect time. That was unusual back then. Also, where he lived in Maryland, they wouldn't have seen many clocks there, even though clocks existed, because again, this was a small farming community. His clock ended up being referred to as one of the curiosities of the wild region. And honey, they use curiosities to describe anything that was a little bit different, okay? Because of this, Benjamin Banneker hosted a lot of people who only came to see that clock. But despite this, it took him years to find a community that he could connect to on an intellectual level. And when I say years, I mean a long time, because now Benjamin Banneker is 40 years old and he meets a family called the Ellicotts. They were Quaker family from Pennsylvania. And as we introduce these new players, let's go into part 2. Part 2 is called Unique Opportunities. So you've been introduced now to the Ellicotts. They had moved to Baltimore County to run a grit mill. And it was just a few miles down the road from Benjamin Banneker's tobacco farm. Benjamin Banneker was really curious, so he actually befriended the Ellicotts and he watched them build their grit mill. But to fully understand this relationship, I think we need to talk just a little bit about the Quakers. The Quakers have been some of the biggest and earliest abolitionists against slavery in America and in the United Kingdom. Perhaps this is because they had been heavily persecuted in England. This was for their religious practices. I know there were a lot of reasons that the mainstream church had persecuted the Quakers, but in my opinion, the biggest reason is they refused to pay tithes. That was and is a big part of those churches that were in that time and that have streamlined from that time. So the Quakers ended up fleeing to different regions, including North America, for religious freedom. So I don't think slavery sat right with them because they had experienced pain and loss and suffering as well. Some cultures would take that and be pitted against another disenfranchised, marginalized people to make themselves feel better. The Quakers did not take that stance. They wanted to help and they spoke out against slavery. And I say all that to say, hopefully the friendship between the Ellicotts and Benjamin Banneker makes even more sense now. Among his new neighbors was George Ellicott. He was a land surveyor. Mr. Ellicott also had a passion for astronomy. And because Benjamin Banneker shared some of these same passions, Mr. Ellicott would lend books to him. These books would include things like lunar tables, other astronomy related books, and also technical books. During this time, Benjamin Banneker wasn't that young anymore. What he had been doing was selling off small pieces of his farm to finance his retirement. Because of this, he wasn't working nearly as much anymore. So the books that he received where they had topics that he didn't know about, he was able to learn these things really fast. In fact, in 1789, the year that he turned 58 years old, he actually forecasted his first lunar eclipse. It's never too late to learn. While Benjamin Banneker was learning astronomy, there were things moving behind the scenes in Congress. In fact, it was just 1 year later that Congress passed the Residence Act. Now, there were a couple of things that this did, but the biggest thing was to establish a new city, and it would be a federal one along the Potomac River. At the time, George Washington was president, and he actually appointed 3 people to oversee the construction of this town. One of the 3 people appointed was Andrew Ellicott. He was George Ellicott's cousin. Andrew Ellicott was a practical engineer. A practical engineer is a person who fills in a gap. So basically, over here is the idea of a federal city. Over here is the implementation and building of the city. How do you make the idea go into the building? That's what a practical engineer's job is. Now, I'm not a practical engineer, so if you have a better definition, put it in the comments, okay? This was a huge project, and Andrew needed help, but his normal people that he worked with were already occupied. They had jobs or they were indisposed at the time. Enter Benjamin Banneker. Andrew actually extended an invitation to him to come help map this new federal city, and Benjamin Banneker readily accepted. This was a big deal for more reasons than you could imagine. The biggest thing is Benjamin Banneker had never been further than 10 miles off of his farm, and now he was on his way to what would become Washington, D.C. It just goes to show that where you've been doesn't always determine where you end up. A lot of Benjamin Banneker stories are from letters from Andrew Ellicott and even more people that we'll get into as the story continues. In February 1791, Andrew Ellicott, Benjamin Banneker, and the crew set out to start surveying the land. At this time, Benjamin Banneker is up there in years. He is 60 years old, and because of his age and health, they had to really pick his role carefully. Remember, this is February in what is now Washington, D.C., so this would have been a tough winter. Because of his age, Benjamin Banneker's primary responsibility was maintaining the observatory tent. He also kept the regulator clock under good maintenance. This was usually a clock that was used to set all other clocks by. He also had altitude instruments, thermometers, a lot of things, because surveying a city is a lot of work. You're surveying to measure angles and height, and you're also measuring what could be placed where, how far apart things are. Every day, Andrew Ellicott used that regulator timepiece to set his own watch by. Because remember, Benjamin Banneker's clock that he had invented was unique because it kept time really accurately. This was important for surveying, so we know when to meet back, how far things were. This was a very important job. Mr. Ellicott also used his watch to determine latitude. At night, Benjamin Banneker would record his astronomical observations that he observed from the the observatory tent. It's also important to note that Mr. Banneker was paid $2 a day for his work. Andrew Ellicott was paid $5, but he was the lead. So Benjamin Banneker's salary was actually in line with the other assistant surveyors. So he was getting equal pay. George Washington, the president at the time, and Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State at the time, had written in a book about 6 years previously that people with African descent were inferior to whites, meaning they were less than whites. They didn't learn like whites learned. They just weren't worth the same as white people. But because of this survey, there was an article in the Georgetown Weekly Ledger that praised Benjamin Banneker's ability. They did note him as being of Ethiopian descent, but they bragged about his abilities as a surveyor, as an astronomer. And they specifically noted that the article by George Washington and Thomas Jefferson saying that black people were inferior had no basis. 2 months later, in April of 1971, they had a big ceremony where they installed 4 stone pillars that would indicate the boundaries of Washington, D.C. as a city. Andrew Ellicott and a lot of other people who just wanted to see the ceremony were there. Benjamin Banneker's name, of course, was not mentioned. However, we know that this could not have been achieved without him. Let's go on to part 3. Part 3 is called Taking a Stance. 1 year later, in 1792, George Washington appointed commissioners to oversee the building of Washington, D.C. And these commissioners started the practice of renting slaves to build the buildings and everything else in the capital. They did this, of course, to keep the labor costs cheap. Not only did the enslaved people clear the roads so that they could be paved, they also brought in and carried every single stone that built the White House that you see today. That's right, enslaved people built the federal capital of the United States of America, a capital that a black man, Benjamin Banneker, had a crucial role in surveying and mapping out. During this same time, Benjamin Banneker had returned to work on his farm, where he went back to working on a project that had been a project of his heart called the Farmer's Almanac. Almanacs were used as a way to predict long-range weather, and Benjamin Banneker's did that as well. He also used his to share opinions and other types of content. That is another way that almanacs has started to be used. Benjamin Banneker's opinion was that slavery had no place. He used his platform to state this opinion explicitly. And yes, Benjamin Banneker had been born free, but as he stated, he had a kinship to his brethren, and he was not blind to the plight of them. Benjamin Banneker published his almanac for 5 years, from 1792 to 1797. His almanacs can be found online, and if you look through them, you will see that he had unique talents as an astronomer, and he was a staunch abolitionist. He did not try to hide his race. At the time, James McHenry had been a well-known statesman in Maryland. He wrote as a testimonial. He said, "I consider this Negro as fresh proof that the powers of the mind are disconnected from the color of the skin." We also need to note that at that time, just like now, people write dissertations and papers, and usually there are peer reviewers to fact check those things. Well, at this time, there weren't a lot of people that had a skill set level as high as Benjamin Banneker's to check his. They had to reach farther out to find that, and there was an abolitionist named David Rittenhouse that was capable of that. He did co-sign the almanac. He called the almanac a very extraordinary performance considering the color of the author. Benjamin Banneker recognized that David Rittenhouse was supporting him. He was co-signing his almanac, but he still had to get it straight. And this teaches us, honey, you can support me and you can still learn, because you may not be supporting me the way you think you are. And Benjamin Banneker said, "How about my work is extraordinary, period." And I quote, "I'm annoyed to find that the subject of my race is so much stress. The work is either correct or it is not. In this case, I believe it to be perfect. Speak your truth, Mr. Banneker." And this would go on for the remainder of his life. He would get frustrated that people would focus in on his race more than the actual skill level of his work or the quality of his work. I think it was a combination of a lifetime of being subjected to racism and other injustices that led him to write Thomas Jefferson. If we flip back to 1791, Benjamin Banneker sent a copy of his almanac to Thomas Jefferson, who was again the Secretary of State. He sent it with such haste that he did not have copies yet. It was a 48-page publication handwritten, so he actually had to handwrite the publication again just to get more copies to publish. With this almanac, he wrote him a 1,400-word letter. So if you were typing a letter in Microsoft Word and you wanted to be neat and easy to read, 12-point font, double spaced, this would be 5 to 6 pages, okay? Benjamin Banneker called back to something that Thomas Jefferson wrote. Thomas Jefferson wrote that the British rule on the American colonies was servitude, and servitude was intolerable, and that there was no state of servitude that is tolerable. So Benjamin Banneker called him out. He is like, how can you say, Thomas Jefferson, that if it's the British and they want to impose taxes and rules on you, it's servitude and it's intolerable. However, when you want to own 600 plus slaves, it's no big deal. And that's worse than regular servitude. And he was right, because over Thomas Jefferson's lifetime, he did own 600 plus slaves. We also know that he had abused some of his slaves, and he definitely had children by his slaves. And again, a slave cannot consent, okay? So let's put that out there. We're gonna call a thing over here. Benjamin Banneker called Thomas Jefferson's acts a criminal act. He asked him, how can you detest this in other people but not in yourself? Baby, applause, Mr. Banneker. Benjamin Banneker was a real one. He had a platform, guys, that a lot of people didn't have, and he used it. Thomas Jefferson actually wrote him back, and we find out later it was BS, okay? Like, let me write this black dude back just to pacify him. It was like, hey, nobody wishes more than me that we could fix the present state of the slaves' plight. I wish their bodies and minds could be better, and I wish we could do it as fast. Let me tell you exactly what he said. As the imbecility of their present existence. Thomas Jefferson goes on to say, but there are circumstances that, can't be neglected. I admit that. I wish we could do something about that while still owning slaves. He actually passed the almanac on to a man named Marquis de Condorcet, and he was a French philosopher and mathematician. It was about 17, 18 years later, he writes one of his friends, Joel Barlow, about Benjamin Banneker's almanac. This black dude right here, he still got a basic frame of mind. His mind very common. But I will say, it couldn't have been too common because it's 18 years later and you still talking about this almanac. I said it. So Thomas Jefferson was a hater, y'all. But what did Benjamin Banneker do? Baby, he posted the receipts. He posted the letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote him. He put it in his almanac. He put his letter, he put Jefferson's letter. He knew Thomas Jefferson was full of it, but he also knew that if he was pretending not to want slavery, that there were people that were allied to him personally and politically that would see him write this letter. And if nothing else, they would talk about him or have a problem with him trying to placate a black guy if that's what he was. And if you weren't placating him, then you were telling the truth about wishing you could do something about slavery. So it wasn't going to leave him in a good light. From that year onward, in addition to making sure his race was clear, Benjamin Banneker started putting his picture on the front of his almanac. On October 9th, 1806, Benjamin Banneker died on his farm in Oala. Days later, guys, during his funeral, his house caught on fire. It was the actual mourners at his funeral that saw that his cabin was ablaze. This is important to note because all of his possessions, including his letters, burned. That's why I said earlier, we know a lot that we know about Benjamin Banneker from his associates and other correspondence. Benjamin Banneker never got married. He never had children. Let's go into part 4, our final thoughts. Benjamin Banneker's story teaches me what a person could achieve if no one was holding them back. What if we lived in a society where people didn't actively try to hold people back or harm people or destroy people and let them live to their fullest potential? What could our society be today? It's just a big philosophical question. Benjamin Banneker was proof that the propaganda being spread about African slaves was ridiculous. Of course, I'm inferior if you are punishing me with the result up to death for learning to read and write. Why would I be educated if the law punishes me for being that? You see what I mean? It's hypocrisy at its highest. It's setting the rules and the law to fit you and to fit your narrative while then using that narrative to push your agenda. And this is what people talk about when they talk about reparations, because that kind of damage done for 400 years to a people can't be fixed in 200 years. I got news for y'all. We are not even 200 years past slavery. Today, we are not. While we're talking reparations, let's talk about how the capital, Washington, D.C., was literally built on the backs of slaves, guys. We know this. This is not a secret. They contracted slave labor to build the Capitol. Do you think the slaves got the money for that? No, because they were slaves, guys. The owners got the money for that. Even Benjamin Banneker's family, it was amazing that he was able to die on the same farm that his parents owned, because that was not always true for black people, guys. It was times they were bullied out of their land, killed off of their land stolen, where other races had the luxury of passing their lands that was rightfully bought and owned down. Black people often did not get that opportunity. Benjamin Banneker's story teaches me to use your platform. If you have a platform, you cannot sit back and watch atrocities happen and not say anything. He used his platform, which was a popular almanac, and that almanac was actually picked up by other newspapers, many of them white, and they would spread that word even farther. He put his face on the almanac. In case you were wondering, Benjamin Banneker, does that sound like an enslaved name? Or he's from Maryland, he's got a farm, does it sound like he was free? You didn't have to guess. You knew he was black when you picked that almanac up, and he was proud of it, rightly so. That said, Benjamin Banneker also made friends. There is no group of people where everybody is bad or everybody is good. It doesn't exist. And Benjamin Banneker knew this. Some of his biggest allies were white. The Quakers, they had suffered injustices, and instead of finding somebody else to put down to make them feel low so that they could feel better, they came in fighting. And it was a Quaker, Andrew Ellicott, that gave Benjamin Banneker an opportunity to show how much he could do. And he paid him equally, guys. You have to accept help when you need the help, and there will be people at any turn in life who are willing to help you. You have to use your platform to stand for what's right. You can't just sit back quietly because you don't agree with it, but you're not going to say anything. My top thing, never be ashamed of your talent. I don't care what the world teaches you. Growing up in the South, and I mean the Southern United States, in the Bible Belt, okay? I've been told, don't be too proud. Don't be too smart in this room because you might make these people feel bad. Don't be too this, don't be too that. And thank God I was raised by parents who taught me to be me. And I know that everybody doesn't have that benefit. So I'm going to tell you, do not dumb yourself down for people. Do not dim your light for people. Be who you are and let your light shine. Oh, also, you're never too old to do something. Benjamin Banneker was 40 years old before he even found a group of people to connect with. He was about 60 years old when he went to survey the capital of the United States. So you're never too old, guys. So I had to throw that in too because I forgot to say it. And guys, this is where we're going to end this history story time. Let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think of Benjamin Banneker's story? What do you think of his achievements? And what do you think of the people who helped him? And guys, until next time, remember, keep learning, be happy, and always have a blessed day. Bye-bye.